What's up, YouTube? In this video, I'm going to show you how to take your Unity transitions from this to this, or this, or this, or this. So if that sounds good, make sure to like, subscribe, leave a comment, and we'll get right into it. Let's go. Alright, so here's what we'll be starting out with. So I went ahead and created a couple scenes. The first scene has this cube in it, and the second scene has a sphere. And I just did that so we can tell that the scene is switching. And I created some empty folders. So we have the prefabs folder, scriptable objects, scripts, and UI. And that's pretty much it. So you can clone this repo, the link's in the description. The first thing we're going to do is create a class that's responsible for actually changing our scene. We'll call this the scene controller. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to go in the scripts folder right here, and I'll create a new C# script. We're going to call this scene controller. And then I'll open this up in my IDE. And we're actually going to make this a scriptable object. So we're going to need this to live on throughout all our scenes. And we're not going to need any of the mono behavior stuff. So let's go ahead and change this to a scriptable object. We'll get rid of these lifecycle methods and the unused imports. And then I'm just going to paste this in. I never remember it, but we're going to go create asset menu. For file name, we'll say scene controller. And for menu name, we'll go scriptable objects / managers / scene controller. And then this class is really only going to need one method, and that's a method that basically just changes the scene. So we'll make this a public method, and we'll call it, it's going to return void, we'll call it change scene. And then for arguments, we're going to need this to accept the scene that we want to change to. So instead of putting a string in here, I'm actually going to create an enum up top here. So I'll go public enum, we'll call this scene. And then we just have scene 1 and scene 2. So now we have this enum, we'll come down to this method here and say, hey, this is going to accept a scene. And we'll just call that new scene. And now we're going to check what the scene is and change to that scene. So let's do a switch statement. So I'll go switch, and we're going to be checking new scene. And we're going to have a couple cases in here. So the first case is going to be scene 1. And when that's the case, we'll go scene manager dot load scene async. And then we'll put the scene name, which is just scene 1, and break. And then our second case is going to be scene.scene2. And when that's the case, we do the same thing. Load scene async. This time it's going to be scene 2. And that's pretty much it. So now we have this method that we can call, and it's going to change our scene. So let's create an instance of this scriptable object. Let's go back to Unity. I'm going to go within the scriptable objects folder. Right click, create, scriptable objects, managers, scene controller. And I'll leave the file name as is. And there we go. We just created our scene controller component. Alright, so now I'm going to create another C# script. And all this one is going to do is make it so it calls that change scene function whenever we press the spacebar. So let's go to the scripts folder. I'll create a new C# script. I'm just going to call this one next scene. And then I'll open it up in my IDE. And in here, I'm going to get rid of these unused imports. And we're going to have a couple settings on here. So let's go serialize field, private. And we're going to store what scene we want to change to. So that's going to be of type scene, which is that enum we just created. And we'll just call this next scene. And then we're also going to need reference to our scene controller scriptable object that we created. So let's go serialize field, private. And this is going to be a scene controller. And we'll just call this controller. And then I'll get rid of the start method. I'll make update private. And then I'm just going to do this the old way since this isn't really important to the video. But let's just go, hey, if input dot, get key down, key code space. Whenever space is pressed, we go controller dot, what do we call that method? We called it change scene. And this takes in a scene, which we have right here. The next scene. So now, hey, whenever they press space, it's going to go to whatever next scene is. So we got this all set up. So let's actually add it in our scene. So I'll go back to Unity. I'll create an empty object. I'll just call this next scene. And then I'll go onto it and I'll drag on the next scene component. So we're in scene 2 right now, but check what you're in. I'm going to make it so scene 2 goes to scene 1. And then right here, we're actually going to select our scriptable object. Hit save, and let's hit play and try this out. So I got the scene running, I press space, and it switches to scene 2. So now let's just make this a prefab. So let's go to our prefabs folder, and I'll just drag it in here. And then I'm gonna go to my other scene. So I'll go to scenes and I'm going to scene 2 now. I'll hit save there. And let's just add that prefab on here also. And on scene 1, we're gonna wanna go to scene 2. So I'll change it over here, hit save, and now we should be able to toggle between these two as much as we want. So let's hit play. And I'm on scene 1, hit space, I'm on scene 2, space again, scene 1, and there we go, we're switching. So now we're gonna smooth this out with some cool effects. Let's talk about how this is gonna work a little bit. So we have our active scene open right here, and what we're gonna do is create a UI document, and this is gonna be a singleton that just lives on the entire time our game is running. And then when we call that change scene function, we're gonna basically display this in a cool way. So maybe it'll fade in, maybe it'll slide in, maybe something different. Let's just say it slides in. It's gonna hide the active scene. We're gonna call that load scene async. It's gonna change it behind this UI document. And then once it's ready, we'll just slide it out or fade it out or do whatever we want. And you won't see any of that harsh changing. It'll just look smooth. All right, so now we're gonna create our UI document. So I'm gonna go within the UI folder. I'm gonna right click, I'll go to create, and then come down to UI-Toolkit and select the UI document. We'll call this overlay. And then I'll right click again, create, UI-Toolkit, and we're gonna create a style sheet. I'll just call this styles. And now I'm gonna double click overlay to open up the UI builder window. And in here, we're gonna connect our style sheet. So to do that, you hit this little plus, go add existing USS, and we select our style sheet. So mine's in UI, and here it is right there. So that just connected it. And then I'm just gonna drag a visual element onto the hierarchy. And then I'll press Command S or Control S to save and close this window. And now we're not gonna use the UI builder window anymore. We're gonna do it from our IDE. So let's go back there. And now we have those two new files right here. So let's open up overlay.uxml. And right here, you see the parent element, and then we're connecting our style sheet. And we actually don't need all this extra stuff at the end, so I'm gonna delete all that. And here's that visual element we added in. So let's remove the style on this. And instead, I'm gonna add a class. And I'll just call this overlay. Hit save, and then we'll go to our style sheet. And we're gonna select that element, so .overlay to select by class. And we're just gonna go, hey, the width is 100%, the height is 100%, and the background color is gonna be black. There we go. Let's go ahead and add this onto our scene now. So I'll go back here, and I'm still running it, I'll stop it. Let's create a new UI-Toolkit UI document. We'll just call this overlay. And then I'll go onto that, and I'm gonna select our UI document. So I'll select overlay. For sort order, I'm just gonna put 999, so it'll most likely sit on top of everything. And then we have these panel settings, and I actually wanna change these, so let's double click it. And instead of constant physical size, I'm gonna change this to scale with screen size. And then for reference resolution, I'm actually gonna change it to 1980 by 1080. Hit save. And now we have that UI document sitting on top of everything, and we can't see our scene anymore. And then one last thing we want to do is just go back to the UXML. And this is going to sit on top of our scene, and we don't want it to basically interfere with maybe menus we're trying to click underneath and stuff like that. So I'm going to add this attribute. It's called picking mode, and we're going to put it to ignore. So now we need a component that's going to manage this UI document. So it's going to be responsible for displaying it in cool ways and hiding it in cool ways. So let's go ahead and create that. So let's create a new C# script. We're going to call it overlay manager. And then let's open it up. Let's get rid of these unused imports at the top, get rid of these lifecycle methods. And then we're actually going to make this a singleton. So we're going to need access to that UI document, which is a live game object. So I'll be using a singleton. If you want to get creative and do it a different way, you can do so. But let's set up the singleton. So let's go static public, and our class is called overlay manager, and I'll call this property instance. And then I always have to paste this in, but we go, hey, on awake, if there's no instance, let's create one and make it so it doesn't get destroyed. And then if we get in some weird state where instance is not equal to this, we'll destroy the game object. So we got our singleton, and now we need access to that UI document. So let's add a serialized field up here. Serialized field, private, it's going to be of type UI document. We'll call this UI doc. So now we got our UI document. So now we got to get the root visual element off of this. And to do that, you'll do it in onEnable. So let's add onEnable. And let's create a property for the root visual element. So let's go private. It's going to be visual element, and we'll call it root L. Go back into on enable, and we'll go root L is equal to, root L is equal to UI-doc.root visual element. And then the next thing we're going to need is access to our visual element that we created. So if we go back in our overlay, we want to get access to this element right here, which has class overlay. So let's go back and do that. We'll create a new property up here. So private visual element, we'll call this one wrapper L. And then we're going to search the root L for that class. So let's go down here. We'll go wrapper L is equal to root L. We'll search with .q, which is short for query. And we're going to look for class name. And the class name we're looking for is overlay. And then I don't like having this string in here. I'm actually going to create a variable for that up top. So let's go up here. We'll go private const string wrapper class, or wrapper CLS is equal to overlay. And then I'll use it down below. So in here, I'll go wrapper class. And there we go. We got access to our UI document. We got access to that wrapper class. And now we need a way to fade it in and out. So to handle fading in and out, we can really lean on USS transitions. So let's go back to our style sheet. And by default, we'll just make this invisible. So we'll go opacity 0. And if we go back, you can see it's gone now. And then when it has an additional class on it, we'll make it so it's visible. So we'll go, hey, when .overlay also has .overlay -- active. When that's the case, we'll set it to opacity 1. And then we don't just want that to happen instantly. We want it to fade in and out. So we can say, hey, we're going to transition the transition property. We're going to transition the opacity. And then we'll go transition duration and say it's going to take half a second. So 500 milliseconds. So now when we want to fade it in, we just add overlay active. And when we want to fade it out, we remove the class. So let's create a couple methods for that within our overlay manager. So up top here, let's just create another property for that active class. So wrapper active class, and that's going to be overlay -- active. And then we'll create a couple methods down here, and we're going to make them public so we can call it from all over the place. So let's go down here, and we'll go public void display overlay. And in here, we're going to take the wrapper L, and we're going to go add to class list and add wrapper active class. And then we're going to copy this and do the opposite. So we'll call that hide overlay. And instead of add to class list, it's going to be remove from class list. And there we go. I think we're ready to try this out. So let's go back to our scene controller. And right here is where we're changing the scene. But before we do that, we want to fade in our overlay. So let's go up top here. And we're going to go overlay manager, get .instance. And we want to display the overlay. And now let's try this out. Let's go back to Unity. And I got our overlay right here. I'm going to add that new component, overlay manager. And then for UI document, it's going to be this guy right here. So I can just click right here, assign it, save. Let's try it out. I'll run my game, hit space. So our overlay faded in, but we actually saw it switch scenes before it fully faded in. So we're going to fix that with async and await. So my favorite library for doing async stuff is going to be Unitask. So we're going to install this library right here. It'll be linked in the description. So let's just see how to install this. Let's search for install. Let's just do it via get URL. Let's copy this URL right here. And then let's go back to Unity. We're going to pull up the package manager. So window, package manager. And then I'm going to hit the little plus and add package from get URL. I'll paste in that URL and hit enter. And now it's going to download the package and install it in our game. So it looks like it's running. I'm going to hit this update button for good measure. And now we're all updated and we can now use Unitask. So let's go back to our overlay manager. And then we can come down to our display overlay function and we're going to make this async. And instead of void, we're going to put Unitask. And now we can use await within this function. So we'll go to the bottom here and we're going to await. And we're just going to put a delay in here. So unitask.delay. And how long do we want to delay for? Well, we want it to match our transition time, which is 500 milliseconds. So let's put 500 in there. And maybe we'll just leave a little comment for ourselves, must match USS. And we're gonna clean this up in a little bit, but let's do the same thing down here in hide overlay. So let's go async, and it's gonna be unitask. And we'll add the same delay at the end. And now we'll go back to our scene controller. And instead of it just fading in and instantly changing scenes, we're gonna await on that to finish, and we can't use await until we make this async unitask. So now we await for it to display, and then we change scenes, which we also wanna await. And then at the bottom, once it's fully changed, we'll fade it out, which is also an await. So instead of display overlay, this is gonna be hide overlay. And now it should fade in, switch scenes, fade out all nicely. So let's try it out. We'll go back and I'll start my game. I'll hit enter. It fades in, changes scenes, fades out. So nice and smooth. So if you just want a basic fade transition, you can stop the video here, but I actually want to add some additional styles and make it easy to configure new transitions. So let's go back to our overlay manager here, and we're going to create an enum. So public enum, and I'll call this transition style. And for the fade transition that we just did, we'll just call that basic fade. And then we're going to create another style right now called 5 slide. And then we'll create a struct down here. So public struct, and we'll call this transition. And this struct is going to consist of a few properties. So the first one is going to be the style of transition it is. So let's go public transition style. And we'll just call that style. We're going to have public int duration ms, which will represent the duration it takes to transition it. And the last one is going to be public string class name. And for each one of these different transitions, we're going to have a different class name so we can easily switch between them. So now let's come down to overlay manager, and I'll just go down here. I'm going to go serialize field. And it's going to be private, it's going to be a list, and we want it to be a list of these transitions, so we have to make this serializable. Come down here, list the transitions, and I'll just call this transitions. Save that, and now we can go back to Unity and go to the overlay manager right here, and now we can add some configuration for each one of those transitions. So for that first one, basic fade, the duration was 500 milliseconds, and the class name is going to be overlay -- basic - fade. And then we'll add another one. I can't see because my camera's blocking it. And this one is going to be 5 slide. Duration is going to be 900, and we'll get to that in a second. But for the class name, it's going to be overlay -- 5 - slide. All right, so we got all our configuration added, and now the next thing we want to do is make it so the user can select what transition style they want to use. So let's go back to our overlay manager. We're going to add a new field down here. So let's go serialize field, private. It's going to be of type transition style, and we'll just call this transition. So now if we go back to Unity, we can see our new field right here where they can select what transition style they want. So I'll leave it at basic fade. And then we have to see what transition style they selected and add the appropriate class to overlay. So we'll do that in onEnable below this stuff. So the first thing we got to do is find what transition class to add. So let's go var transition info. And we're going to search the list of transitions and find the one that matches what they selected. So we'll go transitions.find. We'll just call each one in that list T. And we're looking for t.style to equal the transition that they selected. So this should get us our transition configuration. And then we'll add the class from this to wrapper L. So we'll go wrapper L dot add the class list transition info dot class name. And now we have to modify our UXML and our style sheet. So let's go back here, and we only want this to happen when it has the class basic fade. So let's create a new thing down below, overlay, and overlay -- basic fade So all of this is specific to this transition style. So let's copy out all of this. And then when it has basic fade and active, it'll be opacity 1. So now it should work just as before, but let's verify. So let's go back and we'll hit play. And it transitions just as before, but now if I select the other transition style, so say we did 5 slide and save, the basic fade stuff is not going to interfere at all. All right, so we have a clean slate to style the second transition, but before we do that, I want to go back to my overlay manager, and I actually want to use this duration down here in our methods instead of hard coding in 500. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to store this information so we can use it down there. So let's go up here, we'll go private transition info. And then instead of creating a local variable, we'll just assign it. And now we can use that information down below. So let's go down here and we'll go transition info dot duration ms. And now it's connected instead of always being 500. So now let's go back to our UXML. And for the second transition, we're going to need additional visual elements. So it's kind of hard to get too creative with just one visual element. So let's open this up. And we're going to go ahead and copy this, and we're going to put 5 blocks in here. And these are going to be called overlay underscore underscore block. So let's add 5 of those. And we have to add the self-closing slash right there. And then I'll paste it 4 more times. And then I want each one of these to have a unique class. So let's select all of these. And we'll go overlay underscore underscore block dash dash. And then I'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And now we'll go to our style sheet and use these blocks for the second style, which is going to be, 5 blocks slid off to the right, and then they'll slide in one by one to cover the screen. So let's try that out. Let's just add some comments here. So here's the basic fade styles. And down here, we'll do our 5 slide styles. So we're going to want .overlay dash dash 5 slide. So it only affects when overlay has that class. And we want to get the overlay blocks inside of there. And for each one of these, we want to go height 20%, width 100%, background color, black. And then we're going to slide it off to the right by default. So we'll go translate. And it's going to be 100% to the right, and then we're not going to move it on the y-axis. And this is going to be the property that we transition. So let's go transition property, set it to translate, and translation and transition duration, we'll go 500 ms again. And now when it's active, we want to reset the translate so it slides back. So let's copy all of this. And the only difference is going to be it also has class overlay dash dash active. So now when it has the active class, we set this back to 0, 0. And now I want to stagger them one by one. So let's go back up here and we'll get overlay slide. We'll get the overlay block. And we want to select the second one, so dash dash 2. And we'll go transition delay. 100 milliseconds. And then we'll do this for the other ones too. So the first one comes in instantly, and then each one is staggered 100 milliseconds. So we got 3, 4, 5. And then we have to increase this for each one. So 200, 300, and 400. So now this added an additional 400 milliseconds. So 400 plus 500 is 900. And that's why we set 900 here instead of 500. So I think this should work. Let's give it a try and hope for the best. So I'll save it, go back to Unity, and I'm going to change it to 5 slides, save, hit play, and I hit space, and they slide in and slide out. So that looks pretty cool. All right, so before I end this video, let's add a couple more styles. So the next one's going to be called blink, and it's basically going to slide in from top and then slide back up. So let's go to our overlay manager. We'll go to the style enum up here, and we're going to add blink. And then we'll go back to Unity, and we're going to add configuration for this. So let's go back to Unity, and I'll add a new transition right here. This is going to be for blink. Duration is going to be 500, and the class is going to be overlay dash dash blink. I'll save that. Let's go back to our style sheet now. And then we'll put a new section down here called blink. And for blink, we'll get overlay. .overlay -- blink. And we'll just set background color black so it covers the whole screen. And then we're going to slide it up 100%. So we go translate. And this time the x-axis is 0 and y is going to be negative 100%. And then when it has active, we set it back to 0, 0. And then we gotta get the transition property stuff, which actually matches our last one. So let's copy these two properties right there. Save that, and I think that should work. Let's try it out. Let's go back. I'll select blink as my style. Save it, hit play. And now it slides down and back up. All right, and then the last transition we're gonna do is gonna be called circle. And for this one, we're gonna put a visual element in the middle of the screen. It's gonna be width 0, height 0. But it's going to have a super thick border that covers the entire screen, and the whole thing is going to be rounded. And then to reveal it, we're going to increase the width and height so it basically opens up from the center and reveals the screen. So let's go ahead and do this. Let's go to our overlay manager. We're going to add it, we're going to call it circle, and then we'll go back to Unity and add our configuration. So I did circle 500 overlay -- circle. I'll save that, set our transition to circle. And then let's add the styles, and this one's kind of complicated and I had to play with it, so I'm actually just going to paste it in and explain it to you. So we're basically setting align items and justify content center so the elements inside of overlay get automatically centered. And then on the first one, we're giving it a super fat border, and we're putting position absolute so it can grow outside the bounds of the screen. And then by default, the screen is revealed, so we gave it a super big width and height. And then when it's active, we shrink that width and height so everything comes in. And that's pretty much it. Let's try it out. So I'll go back here. And now when I press space, it's gonna come in and then back out like that. So that looks pretty cool. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like, subscribe, leave a comment. Let me know what kind of cool transitions you came up with. And I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.